Before we start, I just got like Russ does this in his book does. I quite like it. But what was your just overall impression of like these docs? Many kind of, I don't know, cool bits that you didn't know about, or what was the feel?
Honestly, I had lots of things. I don't know that I'm far enough away from it to say like whether it's really cool or life changing, but there are lots of new things for me in these docs. I realized that though I use lots of the join the two table verbs, I I I only really use by, and I didn't realize there were all these other options available, honestly.
Sweet. Well, yeah, I think take us away then. Go for it.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, there we go. Can you see my VS Code?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, awesome. Right. Yeah, I got a little loopy when I know we don't have have to have titles for sessions, but just two table verbs somehow. It was like the Beck song. I got two turntables and a microphone, and I got two data tables and a bunch of joins. That's about the best I can do for today. But so I guess I'll just kind of walk through the docs from top to bottom, really. So got the data frames right here. So I'll be going from bind calls down to the kind of experimental end. Yeah, so you've got two kind of functions that do binding data frames or things like data frames. You've got one where you bind by columns and one where you bind by rows. One thing that I didn't know about these actually and learned through this exercise is you can the dots, the ellipsis right here, can be a number of things. It could be data frames, so where you're binding together data frame 1 and data frame 2, let's say. You could have lists that could be kind of coerced into a data frame. So you could have a series of lists, so this is list 1, list 2. And you could also have lists of data frames. So you could have a list with element data frame 1, element data frame 2, another list data frame 3, data frame 4, and then bind that all together. I was completely unaware that this existed. My traditional use case is this, just binding together two data frames. But it was very interesting to me that these other things could be done. And the result is the same. You get a data frame out of all of these things. So in effect, like if you have a data frame like object, you can bind them together. And in fact, I think you can even, there's one thing that's not documented, but I happen to be tinkering with this on the side for a project a little earlier today, is you can actually take a vector, if I'm not mistaken. So a named vector and just kind of bind together vectors, and it'll make a data frame. Which maybe is off-label usage, but also works, which is kind of cool. So here, you've got the two data frames, bring them together, and you get kind of, a data frame that's just one column, a data frame that's another column, bind them together column-wise, and lo and behold, you have a data frame. And the binding is just done by kind of row index. So how useful this is will be a function of how careful you are in your use case. So here we're binding not by keys, right? Formally, but instead we're binding by sort of like row index as the key in a certain sense. So if I sorted this data frame, for example, and then and then bound it to this name still, and then used bind calls for the two data frames, then I would end up with a different result, right? So if I did, for example, like this, then I would end up with a very different data frame than I had before, right? Because we're simply binding by columns, no keys. And like I said, this was kind of interesting that you can take lists and do exactly the same. So here I have a list named A with the same elements as my data frame above. Another list called B. I bind together list 1 and list 2, and I get a data frame, which is pretty neat. And then you can do with lists of data frames. I think this might end up being useful for me in other settings. But so I've got data frame 1, data frame 2. Now I'll create data frames 3 and 4. And then I can compose lists around these. So list number 1 will have data frames 1 and 2. List number 2 will have data frames 3 and 4. And then I can bind these together, and I get a data frame. Pretty neat.
What if we have list without names? Like L1 is A is equal to vector something, and if we do not have A in here, does this work, or it requires the named list?
So yeah, I think these are unnamed lists right here. But the elements of the list, this is just a data frame, right? So I'm giving this a column. I mean, Shao, were you thinking of a data frame where the column doesn't have a name, where it can have has an empty name?
I'm talking about that L1, L2.
Yeah.
Above example.
Oh, sorry, this one.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. That's a good question. I feel like I looked at that. Didn't need to do that. So it still gets combined. It's just you in the absence of names, the Tibble package, I think, creates a name for both of those columns. Good question though.
So I have I'm trying to do this on my end, but I'm slower on bringing up my coding environment. So when you so your examples for DF1 and 2 earlier on, like your line 14 through 16, you only had one column.
Yep.
In each of those. So sometimes I don't use this super often, like as you said, like joins are generally much safer. But when I do, I tend to end up with things being named. It carries along the origin data frame name. When does that happen, and how do you avoid it? Is it when you have, do you know?
Yeah.
And like maybe that's helpful sometimes, but frequently when I know I'm confident column binding, I'm like, I don't need to know where this originated. It just originated that way because
So Rebecca, do you want something in the name to reflect the column's origin, or you want to not have that?
I would like to understand when I feel like it happens too often for me, and I don't know. I'm always futzing around trying to undo it because I find it unnecessary. I understand like sometimes it could be valuable, but
yeah. So I think,
do you know when it happens?
I could be wrong on this, but I think there are a few contexts in which this could happen. So one is kind of the next thing where you're binding rows. So when you're binding rows, you have an ID option. So you can say for each row from which data set did it come. So that's you have the option with bind rows, but interestingly not with bind calls, at least to my knowledge. Let me.
Am I hallucinating then? I feel like sometimes I end up with the. All right, I'll play around with things on my.
Well, actually, definitely for the joins that can happen. So if you have two tables that you're joining together, and each table happens to have, let's imagine one variable that has the same name and it's not specified as a key.
Yeah.
Then R needs to basically change the name and give it some kind of suffix that indicates which table it came from. So it's almost kind of like the data version of like a get conflict in a certain sense, get merge conflict, because like these two things have the same name yet maybe different contents, and you and I, the user, we need to kind of give it maybe a more appropriate name. And I think another context where I've seen it, and I guess this is sort of just the using map maybe around kind of wrapping bind rows, is with per has some data frame variants of map, and I believe with that you can also have this ID part, but I think there it's actually, I'll have to look, maybe we'll come to that when we come to per, but I know that there's an ID argument that's available, and I'm blanking now on where and what context it's available, whether it's always available, whether you're joining or sort of like stacking data frames. I'm not sure, but I mean, at least as regards bind calls, it looks bind columns, you don't have an ID. You can't indicate the origin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although if I had two conflicting names, let's say I had A and A, then R would resolve that in its way of resolving things. Oh wait, maybe it doesn't. What have I done? Oh, sorry. Autocomplete sometimes helps, sometimes doesn't. Yeah, so this is, it resolves that conflict, that name conflict, by just indicating this is from, I guess, element 1 and element 2 in your list of things to bind together.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Good question though. And I, like you, would, I think, more often want to know where my data is coming from. Yeah.
This list thing. So this is cool because I never really did bind calls with list. I'd like make a data frame, then make a tibble or something. Like row 18 to 20. That's like faster than using tibble on L1 and L2, because I was just looking at you get like these list columns that you then need to unnest. Whereas just calling it a bind calls, you just get, I don't know, it comes out as it should. It comes out as a tibble with not nested columns, which is nice. And the per thing is in the map, or the underscore DFR things, like functions. Yeah, like map underscore DFR has a dot ID. I think it's that one.
Which has been deprecated.
It's been deprecated.
Superseded. I don't know, whatever. They now do like list C and list R is what when you go to the help side, what they recommend. It still works. It totally works. They have a different solution that they recommend because they say it's not consistent with some of the other mapping things.
It's in, so wait, the whole map underscore DFR, like the whole function is superseded.
Well, that's why we're in this class.
Yeah, no.
Maybe I will take that one. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I thought so.
No, I don't
want to get too off track, but I think.
No, yeah, it does say on the
superseded. Yeah, it says superseded.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that. I mean, that's when we get to per, I guess that will.
Yeah, that was with the release in whatever, February 1.0.
Map underscore DFR is so popular, actually.
Yeah.
It is, but the workaround is like very minor, and they just say it's for consistency, and you can still use it. So
I didn't know about it for ages. You use reduce and like bind rows or whatever, and it does the same thing, but it is a nice shortcut.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Oh yeah, this was the other thing that I was kind of surprised by. Is it didn't mention this in the docs, but you can take vectors. I guess it's basically things that could be coerced into a data frame, and then bind the calls, and here you get a nice tibble. I mean, granted, you don't get names. I guess I could name these, either changing the, giving it a name attribute or something like that. Probably solve that problem.
If they were the wrong length, so if you put like 1 to 4, would it raise an error? Or would it like coerce them to list?
I think there's a recycling rule. That's a good question. Oh, can't recycle. Okay,
yeah, that's cool. Because if you say, if you call like tibble, I put it in Zoom chat. It's just like if you call tibble on L1, L2 or V1, V2, you get this horrible structure. But with like dplyr bind calls, you don't. Then I guess with tibble, if you had two things that weren't the same length, it wouldn't matter because the list would be length 1. That makes sense.
Yeah. I bet if you give that back, if you just have V1 be 1, it'll recycle though, right?
Yeah, I think you're right on that.
Yeah.
It would be C1, but yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't know how to recycle in this case. So it's I guess it's kind of the usual tidyverse stuff. Either the length is 1 or the length is the length of the data frame. And if it's
Well, you
div
can also
one,
have
then
it be
it'll
like
recycle.
just a divisor of it. It'll.
Oh, right.
In base-R you can, but isn't there something in Tibbles or something that it won't? Like if you've got a 4-length thing and you've got a 2-length thing, isn't it that it won't recycle it in tidyverse, but it would in base-R? Or is it maybe it's the other way around?
I don't know if that's true, but that sounds like something. I mean, I feel like so much of the tidyverse stuff is preventing you from accidentally doing things you didn't mean to do. And so that seems like something they would put a little guardrail on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would seem reasonable, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, that seems reasonable too. Yeah, the other thing, so just kind of working through the function arguments here. You've got name repair. This is actually kind of an interesting read if you have time to come back and look at this vectors. But it's sort of like let's imagine that I'm going to do something that's nonsensical. So I'm going to bind empty cars to empty cars, right? So we know by construction both of those data frames have the same column names. So you have this name repair argument that allows you to tell dplyr how you want your names changed, basically. And so with this universal, I'll leave everyone to kind of look at the details here, unless there's like lots of interest when you dive into it. Basically, it says that each name needs to be universally unique within the resulting data frame that's returned by this operation. So if I run this, oops, sorry, sometimes this happens, then you can see that there's this big attempt to rename all the variables so that they're globally unique. So in the first data frame, MPG gets turned to MPG1 and so forth. So you end up with this set of names with all of the dots in between, so that everything has a unique name. So this is, I guess, the number corresponds to the column index. So you've got here MPG, which is in, I guess in the first column in the first data frame, and then MPG, which is in the first column of the second data frame, but globally the 12th column. So in this way, you can get unique names. Maybe not the best names, but you get unique names for all of these things, even though there's kind of name collision within the environment of the data frame. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. I've never really run across this much. Never cared about this, never worked with it, but nice that it's here. Has this mattered to anyone? Is this a point of interest for anybody?
No, I was wondering about minimal, like
Minimal.
change universe.
Yeah, so I think minimal is
I was trying to
I think
figure out the point.
it allows for empty names, if I'm not mistaken. So where there's a name, but the name is equal to basically empty white space.
Yeah, but it seems to like if you do it, so if you put it instead of universal, and like it just seems to, the names are just duplicated now. Like,
oh,
if you do something like select MPG, you're going to get an error that says you can't because it's in 2 places. So I was like trying to figure out why.
Wait, that's what it does? It doesn't just select both of them?
No, it just doesn't let you do it.
Because it's not valid. It's like,
I guess because it doesn't know which one. Like, I wonder if you can, I don't know, can you like select and then contains MPG, like, and then does it? I don't know, but I don't really see.
Oh, sorry. Whoops. Names must be unique. Okay. So I guess tidy select doesn't work when names are non-unique.
Yeah, but why would they let you? What does minimal? I don't know. Seemed weird. Maybe it's just like,
Yeah. So minimal is this a name attribute is not null. So it enforces that the name attribute is non-null. That's the only restriction, really.
okay, right, gotcha.
So the name could be empty, but not NA. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
If you don't use names repair and you bind calls and like mount cars, it kind of gives you one that's like universal or like because it puts some like dots after everything, and you see like
Oh yeah,
dots.
so it does.
So it kind of does that.
It basically does do the universal, right?
Yeah, maybe it does
Or,
it by
sorry.
default.
Seems so.
And I see. So if you do like cbind, like the base R1, then it does the same thing as before. Like it lets you have 2 MPGs, and I guess that's what this
Oh,
is.
I see.
Yeah.
So in other words, kind of to the point that Rebecca made earlier, is tidyverse has a default that seems like a sensible default. Put some guardrails, but it also lets you make mistakes. If you really want minimal for a name repair, then you can get it, but have fun dealing with it. That's cool. On, I guess, to bind rows. So yeah, basically you're in effect, you have I don't go into any detail on this, but it's very similar to our to bind calls, in that you can bind together a list of data frames, lists of things that could be data frames, and lists of data frames. So you can do all of that same stuff. So the arguments, the ... is the same as with, or at least my understanding is the same as with bind calls. And the one thing that's new about bind calls, I mean, obviously the obvious thing that's new is that it's binding data sets together in a different fashion. It's kind of stacking data sets rather than kind of appending them kind of on the, or what do I say, like rather than binding them by columns, it's binding them by rows. The other new thing is that you have this .id argument, which is a little bit what Rebecca was talking about earlier. So if I bind together, data frames 1, 2, 3, 4 that I created earlier, then I'll have this resulting data frame where I've just got a bunch of stuff. It's kind of the short way of putting it. I've successfully bound together all these data frames, but and the actually this doesn't do the thing I had hoped it would do. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I was expecting this operation. Oh yeah, sorry, I should do this. .id equals ID, let's say. That's what I was missing. So it'll create an ID column, and in this data frame, you'll see that these rows are from data frame 1. So these rows are from data frame 2, these from 3, these from 4, and the number refers to the position in the list order. So we know that 1 refers to the first element, 2 to the second, etc. But maybe you might want to do something different, potentially better. Let's imagine now that your data frames were named in some fashion, and you could create again that ID column. And in that case, if your data frames are named, then maybe you could have something more meaningful come here. So this is kind of a silly example. So df1 is first, df2 second, etc. And so now I can look at this and I can see where it's come from. Maybe another use case, at least I've done in the past, is maybe taking file paths or file names that end up being the names of my data frames, and then I can kind of see where observations are coming from. That more kind of with the in per world, but I think underlying all of that is probably this technology. This is probably some of the per stuff wraps around bind rows. I thought that was kind of interesting.
And you get $signs if you didn't have that column, or?
You get nothing. If you didn't have the ID column, yeah, you get actually
Okay.
oh,
right. Yep. Okay.
So you just get the data frames that are bound by rows, but no indication for each row about that row's origin, which data frame or data frame like thing it came from.
I
Um,
definitely have done stupid workarounds for how to keep track of where things came from, and I've read the documentation that there's an ID.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Thank you.
Although it's kind of hard,
Massive.
Rebecca, like I feel like I ended up doing maybe too much work in one context where I really badly wanted to have this ID column populated. And you know, I think I was using the FS package for the file system package.
Yep. To keep track of, I did exactly what you've done for the keeping the file origin name as the.
Exactly. So it basically take the path, and you know that
Mhm,
ends like when you have the path, it's like FS returns like a named path.
mhm,
So
mhm,
like you have the path as a character vector, and then it's also
Mhm.
the name of the thing. So it's kind of convenient for this.
mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely like just mutated and created an ID column right before binding and or joining, and it's like, oh, I could have just used that one little argument.
The other thing that was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
in base R, actually, we do not have this option, or maybe we have in R bind,
Okay.
because we do the same in R bind, binding the rows.
Let's see, where has my documentation gone? Oh, there it is. I just wasn't patient enough. Is this base?
Yeah, it's actually base, but just like the C bind, there is an R bind. Why it is not?
R bind,
Probably it'll show C also here.
R bind strict to the.
Oh, it's in the same doc. That's why. Okay. There's not a separate index entry.
With R bind, you have to have the same columns and stuff or something, right? Like there might be an argument that allows you to not, but bind rows will just, it'll add in extra columns and just put them as an A, as you can see here. But like R bind wouldn't let you do data frames that don't have the same columns.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've not used base R very much, unfortunately. Maybe moving on to set operations. This was a little new to me. I'd used a few of these functions relatively rarely, but then there are also functions I didn't know about at all. So just, I guess for completeness, I'll show the functions that exist. So you can, taking two data frames, and here the data frames need to have, so kind of picking up on this point about they need to have the same row, same column names. In this case, X and Y need to have the same column names, because it's basically taking the data set as sort of like a collection, basically a set, right? And so sets need to have the same elements in this case. And so you can look at the intersection of X and Y, the union of X and Y, and this was kind of interesting, this distinction here. So if you take union of X and Y, it'll give you all of the observations that are found in either X or Y, including observations that are duplicate entries. So I guess if you have two rows that are identical in X, then those rows will actually, you only find one of those rows when you use union. So it's sort of the union of distinct observations, I guess is the way I'd kind of internalized it. But if you indeed want to have the union without any filtering out of duplicates, you can use union all to get all of the rows that appear in both X or Y, including duplicate entries.
Is this new, union all and
I
SIMD?
was wondering about that because some of the, I haven't used these often, so I don't know if they've always been there and I've never had a use case, so that's why I didn't know about it, or if these are indeed new. But I was asking myself the same question, Jack.
Yeah, because it seems weird. Like I get their set operations, right? So like
Yep.
union, when it excludes duplicates, that means it returns a set because you can't have duplicates in a set.
Yep.
Then union all allows duplicates. So it's like, it's not really a set operation anymore because you got duplicates, and you can't have duplicates in mathematical sets, at least. But I guess I can see why they would include it though. People are using it because they just want the common thing, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird. In SimDiff, like I've always done something wonky where I do like set diff xy and then set diff yx and then something
Exactly.
else.
Exactly. So it's basically, I kind of realized this as I was reading through is, it's essentially, the combination of like what you said, like set diff xy and set diff yx. It's, kind of the union of those two. So it's sort of a convenience function, it seems, perhaps.
Yeah, because I did always kind of think with set diff, like I didn't get back what I thought I would. Like I didn't think the position should matter. I thought I was getting like a set of the stuff.
Oh, so with set diff, position does matter?
Yeah, because that's why you need to do set diff xy and then set diff yx to get simdiff. Like if you,
I guess by position I meant more like order, row order.
oh, sorry, I just mean the position of the arguments. Like,
oh, I see. Yep.
Why? I think yeah, the rows and stuff, they shouldn't matter too much. But I always it never seemed like it always seemed like simdiff for me should be what set diff, like set diff should be what simdiff is. I don't know if anyone else had that, but I always found it weird that I had to do this extra thing, which was, yeah, like we say, the x, y, and yx.
So I never these. I do like just joins to get these answers, and I'm very glad we're here. But what is your use case for reaching for these instead of joins? I mean, I get it. Rows are different from, I mean, you'd have to specify all keys or something, but I just don't think I've got data where I don't have. Yeah, anyway, I'm interested in use cases, if you don't mind.
Using stuff, because you do it on columns or something, like some ID columns and stuff. And you can kind of just do it like the percent in, percent, I guess, or whatever, which is what I just always tend to use. And yeah, I think you can do all of this stuff with joins. It just might be a bit more direct for like intersect, because that's just an inner join if it's on IDs or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that there are like big use cases beyond joins, just maybe more concise.
No, it's definitely concise. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd only reach for intersect when I just couldn't be bothered with doing the inner join, like specifying the columns to bind by. And I knew full well that my x and y had identical columns. But I think I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've used any of these.
So I guess that's the point, right? When you've got two data frames that represent the same data,
yep,
you could do it that you could definitely do it with joins, but which is what you'd need to do if they represent truly different types of data. But you'd save yourself typing if you reach for these, if it's the same sort of stuff. Okay.
Yeah. That's been my rationale, at least.
All right, I'll save my fingers some
typing, yeah.
But so it says in the docs that they replace the base functions. So I guess if people use them in base, I think that's what I originally knew about them. That's maybe why I got confused about how dplyr set diff works. But yeah, I don't think now that dplyr and stuff exists, you really need them that much. Or it's not obvious when you would.
Sorry, I was just looking at the documentation myself.
So I have a question about this. It says it overwrites the base operators, right? Base functions.
Yeah, so like
when
it takes them, it changes the namespace by default to use the dplyrs, I guess it means.
So when I like load tidyverse and get the warnings up top about what's masked, I feel like the only things I really notice are the stats filter or stats
like stats
or something.
filter.
So, but why wouldn't I also see these things being mentioned as being masked?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, because I don't notice them.
We just don't look. But I never noticed that either, I think.
I'd never noticed it until now, actually. I always see filter and lag, and then I just say, yeah, this is a warning. I'll continue on.
Thank you. This is like that basketball game with the like the bear runs through it or whatever and nobody sees it. I feel like
Right.
I never noticed that. Thank you.
So on to joins. Yeah, I sort of didn't understand initially when I was first coming to dplyr why these are called just mutating joins. I just kind of took for granted that they were, but I guess they're called, having gone through the dplyr documentation for mutate and now kind of coming back to this after a few readings, I realized it's because they add columns, which is what mutate does, right? Just it didn't click with me until now. So here, let's imagine we have two data frames, data frame 1 and 2. I'll just overwrite what I had previously to a degree. So I'll have in data frame 1 columns A and B, data frame 2 columns A and C. Then I could be interested in joining these two data sets so that I could have a data frame with A, B, and C together. So if you're looking at, actually, so for this, I'm not looking at really kind of the particular joins. I sort of jumped over this part about, left join, right join, inner join, all the rest. I felt like that might be a little, I'd assume that was fairly familiar for most of us, and also all of them share arguments. So instead, in the presentation, I'm really focusing on the arguments. I'm using left join, but principles still apply as best I can understand. So, I mean, if you guys want to go into more of like what's left join, right join, inner join, etc., you can pull me. Please feel free to pull me back. But I was inclined to kind of look at the shared arguments, if that sounds sensible.
Yeah, it sounds good. Sounds
Okay.
better than going through the joints.
Okay. So I'm just using left join throughout because more often than not, that's what I want to do. So first argument of interest is by, which is, as I mentioned at kind of like the top of the presentation, is all that I'd really used up until this point. I'd always been very scrupulous about writing out the joins, and I never really realized that dplyr tries to do work for you if you let it. So that is to say, if I try to join, if I join together, you do left join for X, or sorry, with df1 and df2, dplyr's join verb will understand that there's a column named A in both of the data sets, data frames, and so it'll join on that. And so if I perform that operation, it gives me a little message saying joining with by equals, and it gives me the join specification with this new join by, which actually we'll come to because that was new for me. And they call this a natural join. So it's basically they're joining on same named columns that exist in both data frames. So I thought that was really quite nice. But of course, it may be the case that you have columns A and B in two data sets, but they actually contain different data, and so you don't want to use those as a common key for joining. Better practice, I suppose, then is to specify your join somehow. And there are lots of ways you can do so. The way that I've been doing so is as follows. So just having by, and then have some character vector that describes how things join. So if it's a single column, it would look something like this. Alternatively, I could rewrite this as the column A in data frame X. And X is the same as the column A in data frame Y. So this is kind of a little bit shorthand. If I had multiple columns, I could specify this in a different way. So I could, A equals B, for example, if B was the same in Y was the same thing as A in X. But you could do this with the kind of the character vector specification. This is what I'd always done to this date. And there's this new thing, or at least new to me. I don't know if it's new to others. There's this something where, so what I always thought kind of strange about this character vector join, and eventually I just took for granted that it was the way it was, is that you're providing it a name, right? A name that's a character vector, right? And I always thought that was kind of odd, where it seemed like in most of the tidyverse, I'm specifying bare names, of objects or variables in the tidyverse verbs. But here, when you're joining on a character vector that represents the name of a column. I always thought that was a little odd. Well, now you've got this join by specification where you can actually list the name. You can list bare names now. So if I wanted to perform the same operation as here, I could rewrite it as follows. So I could have, by, and then join by, and then I could list the name of the columns. And this, so I guess in a certain sense, like this join by offers feature parity, I guess, for basic cases with this. So it's just a different way of writing things, but also offers some other interesting stuff, which I'll come to later. So you can do different kinds of joins that I don't know if they are possible before. So basically what you're doing if you're writing in longhand is you're saying that join by in column A. So this is references like a bare name in X is equal, basically merge it where the key A is A in the data frame X is equal to the key A in the data frame Y. So you're joining on where keys are equal, in other words, with join by here, and you obtain the same result, between these two things. We'll come back to this join by in a bit. I thought that was interesting. I'm curious, is this join by, have I been living in a cave or is this new to other people as well?
No,
Also cave.
that's new, right? Like that was one of the things I think I saw in the thing a while back when they first spoke about dplyr 1.1 was like, it's unnatural. It's like un-R-like to say A assigns as A or something, like the one equal sign. So they're offering this chance to use the double equals because it's more like how we normally express equality between things in R.
Oh, I got it.
But I do think it's new.
Okay.
There, so I think you did briefly like reference it or mention it. You've put like by equals A here, just above.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I think you mentioned it in passing. It's like if in the other data frame, the same column, or like there was an ID column and like one's called A in one and it's called B in the other. That's like when you use this kind of thing. Or so like I think you couldn't have the two.
Oh, you're right. Sorry.
Because I quite often have something like, we've got a thing, it's called document or doc ID. And they're the same information. They're the same. It's just people have named them differently or whatever. And we have to use this. But could we always not specify what was what? Like if you don't specify any of them and you just put, no, it's A, could you always specify? Was that always the case that you could do that? But it did this natural join thing?
I don't know. I remember when I was learning dplyr, it seemed like the instruction was always focused on specifying the keys.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I thought it wouldn't do it. And then it just started working one time. Or someone said to me, like, why have you specified that? And I was like, because you have to. And they're like, no, you don't.
Interesting. I think this might actually make, so I guess Rebecca, for our Rlang club, I think this might actually make some of the Rlang stuff easier now that you can mention a bare name instead of having to like take a variable name and turn it into a character in order to do this kind of thing.
Okay.
I found this a pain to handle in the past, like constructing this thing programmatically somehow. So for this one right here, actually, this comes up in a few places. There's this copy argument, and I don't understand it at all. I don't know if anyone has any insights as to what is meant here. Copy if X and Y are not from the same data source. I don't quite know what that means. And copy is true.
Oh,
Then Y will be copied into the same source as X.
this sounds like it's a database because it's a generic, right? It's this sounds so. My guess, well, I could totally be wrong, but the thing that actually confuses me is when you're using dplyr. Like I expect more functions to be written in dplyr, but it's still like dplyr generics with the method is implemented as. I don't understand those details. Anyway, but I bet this to me looks like it's a database thing.
It's a database thing. Okay. Yeah, I didn't understand how to. Well, I didn't know how to understand source here, the SRC. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's a database thing.
But so isn't that, you know, you got like your you got bash scripts or something. You got like, what is it? If you want to index or if you want to get to the file, you go to like your home directory or whatever, then it's a hidden file. It'll be like .bash src. And src is an acronym that means something that I've long forgotten. But it has a particular meaning in computing. Let's see what it says.
System resource controller. Is it the same?
Yeah. Turns out executable programs that take options from the command line. Yeah, I don't know how it applies to dplyr, but it must be like maybe it's databases that are, I don't know, one's on Linux or something, and one's, I don't know, somewhere else.
I kind of doubt that, but when you I'm gonna just paste this in the chat rather than reading it out. This is obviously different than I'm pasting in the chat, but I see this SRC a lot in the dplyr related stuff. Obviously, I just pasted yet another thing to.
Oh, yes, sorry.
But remote source. So you're right that I don't understand. So you're right that I don't understand it deeply at all. But when I see that, to me, that's a clue of.
That's a clue that it has to do with databases. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it. And they're using SRC to mean just
source, I guess.
Well, you're right that it's not defined, and my brain had just said source, and I am intrigued to see if they spell this out in more detail somewhere.
Because their arguments of dest is remote data source, and that would make sense if they're just abbreviating somewhere in the thing. Yeah, I suppose. Maybe one to flag up just to ask them, or to ask John to ask them, because John seems to have like a line to the whole of our studio.
Yeah. I mean, this one threw me for a loop. I had no idea what to say here because I didn't understand. And I think there also weren't, I didn't control F here. I think there weren't any, all right, that's probably gonna come up scores of times. I don't know if there are any examples. Yeah, there are no examples using that argument. So I didn't know what to make of it. Suffix. So this is kind of the thing I was talking about earlier. So by default, if you join, so if you have two data frames, so just as kind of a reminder, I have these data frames df1, df2, and if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to join by A in df1 and C in df2, then that would mean I would have two A's, right? Two column A's, one that comes from df1 and one that comes from df2, because I'm treating the A in df2 not as a key, right? So by default, to resolve this name difference, dplyr appends this .y to indicate the origin of that A, right? So if a variable comes from X, the table X, it'll append .x to the end of the variable name, and if it comes from table Y, it appends .y to the end of the end of the variable name. But you can also do user. So this is the default, but you could also provide user provide your own names. In other words, so I could have the same scenario. Instead of having .y, I have .right. I guess I don't know if there's anything special about dot. I think you probably just need to have symbols that would make it a syntactical name. Let's actually explore that. If I do underscore, will this work? Or is there something magical about dot? Nope. Okay, you can definitely make the names you want.
Yeah,
so that,
it's pasting the other thing, right? The A
Yep.
and the underscore. So the pasted name ends up being like syntactical or whatever.
Yep.
Is there in joins, one of the things that's always annoyed me is when I know that there are multiple columns, say there's lots of columns in a data set. I know that there's an ID column, but there are say 10 other columns in the however many columns that they are the same and they have the same name. And then you get these suffixes with like .x or .y.
Yep.
Is there not a way to just go like, don't keep duplicates, like just keep one, or like?
This is one thing that I know I can do in Stata that I don't quite know how to do in R, at least elegantly. So in Stata, I can merge together two data sets, and I can say for the data set that so it's sort of like left join, right? So in my Y data set, let's say in R terms here, or in dplyr terms here, I can say which columns to keep. So I can specify, if I know that there's overlap and it's sort of like column-wise updating rather than row-wise updating, then I can specify which columns to bring in from the my Y data set into the X data set. I don't quite know how to do that in R directly.
What I do for that, and I hear you that I think it would be nice if there was some function where you could just say, I don't need to join on all of these things specifically, but if there are other things in this Y, just give preference to X and don't duplicate everything, because they should be equal. But what I do is just, so if I have a dplyr left join X, Y equals df2, and then I just stick the select statement there.
Yeah, exactly.
Which doesn't feel like a ton of extra writing versus how I would do it in the one other language I know.
Yeah, I do that sometimes, like pipe in select.
Yeah, before I knew you could pipe within statements, like that was kind of a whole leap.
Yeah, likewise.
Within arguments,
likewise.
yeah. What?
Yeah, because I guess, and you can always you can use select afterwards and use tidy select to drop all the ones that are .y or whatever. But
true.
Yeah, it's just a bit. It feels like it should be an argument. I guess there would be reasons why you wouldn't want to do it though, because in a lot of columns you might not know all of them where they're saying, and if they're the same name but they're not the same value.
Yeah.
Like they're from two different databases and they're completely different, then yeah, maybe it is better to keep both just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, I think Rebecca, I think your solution is the best with the select. I just sort of, I don't know. I wish there were an argument, but again, that's just me like wishing I had in R what I have in Stata. But there's a different way to do things that's equally valid and not that much effort. Keep. This is also new to me. So if you're although I'm not sure why you wouldn't, why you'd want to have anything more than the default, which I think is false here. So if you have your two data frames, df1 and df2, remember we've got A in both of those, and if we're joining by A, I could actually select to keep A from both. So I'll have AX and AY. So even though I'm joining on them, the default is that I guess if you're the things that you join on, you're going to keep, in the case of left join, you're going to keep the variable from X. In right joins, it's going to be the variable from Y, I believe. But you could do this thing if you wanted to. So this keep argument allows you to say whether you want to keep it and kind of a little bit about how. This is new to me.
I think actually I can envision a use case for that. I didn't know about this.
Okay.
But I have keys. I mean, it seems like it makes more sense when you've got keys that are named differently and you have to specify both of them in the by. And like
Yeah.
you have later joins, and this way you have you don't have to remember what your ID is.
Yeah, that makes sense. You
but-
won't get the Y after because it'll just keep the name because it's not a duplicate
Yeah, it'll
name.
just keep both of them. Or so I have some keys that are like sometimes characters and sometimes numeric.
Oh, yeah.
In different, depending on what table they're saved in. And so sometimes I'll do that mutation of like as dot numeric in the join, but then that makes it more annoying later down. Like I have to undo that or do it in the
Mhm.
other table. And so there, when I've done a mutate, because you can mutate within the by statement, not mutate as in feed it the mutate, but do an as, you can definitely do an as dot numeric on a character variable or other way around. So like keeping both of those, I don't have to redo that decision anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess another way you could do that if you had, I guess if you had labeled data, then I guess you could kind of make it, have it be a number, you have it be numeric, but then have labels, and then if you needed to print a report, for example, you could just, have it be the label, but then that assumes you have labeled data. In most of my use cases, I have labeled data. So meaning, like, for example, all the values that a column could assume are labeled, and that's an attribute of that column. For example, like male, female, could be something like that. The join by cliffhanger. Thanks. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe because we're at the end of like the time, but there's still quite a bit to go because there's all the like new stuff like rolling joins and
Yeah.
stuff. Do we just put a flag in it here and come back next week?
We could. Yeah, because it seems like it's maybe a bit much to if I continued on and the recording would have it recorded, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot to it. Like,
Yep.
This is one of the ones that we've stopped the most on to talk about stuff, which is cool because obviously
Yep.
there's a lot of stuff we are learning.
And then there's completely new stuff, at least for me. I mean, and down here for these, I've just I've not developed anything because I feel like the docs, I can't do better than the docs. Not that the previous material was better than the docs, but I couldn't easily come up with like a clear reduced example. Cross joins is really cool, and that, at least for my own part, I was really captivated by this. Well, yeah, the join specification that Rebecca was pointing to, this join by function, and then this new set of things which I don't know SQL, so I don't know how true this is to SQL, but this idea of kind of doing SQL insert or update, delete, patching, NAs, really pretty neat.
Yeah, I think let's stick a flag in it and we'll come back.
Okay.
And then that gives us more time to look at the bits that were newer and like those cross join things. Because we were going to do vectors next
Yeah, I
week.
think Shaw was going to do, if I remember correctly, he's going to do the vectors things, all the between and case match, case when.
Yeah,
Which also
vector
seems really
functions.
quite big. That might be definitely like a 2-week one.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So what would you guys prefer though? Would you prefer to finish joins next week or do vectors next week and then go back to joins?
It's up to Arthur. If he can continue, we should finish. Otherwise, it's okay for me to present next week. So
I'm fine either way. So Shaw, if you have any preference or any obligations that would make it easier for you to present next week as scheduled, I mean, we can do that, or I can continue next week, whichever works best.
okay, let's I think continue with you, and then I can take them.
Okay.
After.
Yeah, and
Sign up sheet.
I'll post. Well, I mean, I guess you already have the file, but I'll post it to the to the repo, and yeah, maybe even make some changes with the benefit of additional time.
Oh, nice. That's a really I think you can tell just by the amount of back and forward between everyone. That's a really interesting one. So
I know. I
thanks.
mean, there's so much with the joins, honestly, and here I'm just talking about single arguments, and just imagine the combinations of arguments. That's I don't know how that would work in practice, but for me, I don't know that I'm going to use any of these things, but it's nice to know that it exists. So
Yeah,
that
but it's like
whenever I
two-
come up against a use case, I know that it's there, and I'm not reinventing the wheel if dplyr already has a solution.
Yeah, exactly. That's I don't know if I'll ever use them, but I get the feeling in 6 months' time something was ping in my head one time. I'd be like, "Oh, remember, you can do this." It would be nice.
We were actually planning like very fast to end this documentation. You remember, Jack?
Yeah, like 4 weeks.
And now we are, and now we are like stuck at only data frames, and then we have to go to per and ggplot and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we expanded, I think, the scope of dplyr, right? Like we didn't just focus on 1.1 stuff, which is cool because it's a huge package and there's undeniably a lot of things that all of us don't know about all of the stuff. Yeah, while it's good, while it's interesting, I'm quite glad it's taken a bit longer. Right, I've got to bounce, so I'm going to update the sign up sheet. I'll change the name to like, I don't know, what's this, 2 table verbs 2 or whatever. And then you guys can chuck your names in and we'll see if we can finish joins next week, I suppose.
Yeah,
Cool.
okay. Thank you.
I guess the pun, the obligatory pun to those watching, join us next week.
Well then, see you later. Have a good
All right,
one.
bye-bye.